Hello, my name is Chris Parham, and this is my project for Human Data. What happens to your data when you go to a social justice protest? My Data, My Rights for the Design Studio 2 Dynamic Media Institute, spring 2022. And my project deals with, my case study actually deals with four subjects that I'm going to be using for my case study that have gone to social justice protests in the summer of 2020 during the George Floyd protests. And a lot of these protesters are first time protesters. And the thing is, my preparation just deals with how will deal with how the data of social justice protests is used by law enforcement, whether they have been arrested or charged with a crime, and protesting is protected under the First Amendment of the Constitution. And how is that data used when it comes to credit, job prospects, college admissions, applying for jobs, civil service employment, trying to get an apartment or house? And what are the causes of these issues? What is it about the data, for instance, that is used by law enforcement that is used to basically punish a lot of the protesters. And that's my basic preparation. And I'm going to introduce four participants as a part of my case study. And all four individuals were arrested at Black Lives Matter protests during the summer of 2020 when George Floyd protests were happening around the country. And again, these four individuals are all young people, and I'm going to talk about them individually and then talk about what is going to be the case, what's going to be the resolution, and how to deal with creating basically recommendations on how to be able to control your data. And that's the purpose of my project is how can I empower people basically to control their data when they go to a social justice protest. And we're going to start off with two subjects, actually four subjects. And my first subject was a 20-year-old college student, Tiana Arata, in Los Angeles, who got arrested at a Black Lives Matter protest. And she ended up with 13 misdemeanors. And I believe that the case is still pending to this day. I'm not really sure, but I think they may have worked out a deal. But the thing is, the protest happened on July 21st, 2020, and she supposedly led 300 protesters to block Highway 101 in California for an hour, and she was arrested after the protest was over. And my second subject is a young lady, Maxima Guerrero, who is a young lady who happens to be a DACA recipient. And her name, excuse me, and she is also a community organizer for the Puente Human Rights Movement. And she got arrested at a Black Lives Matter protest in Phoenix on May 30th. And she was arrested and she was also put into ICE detention. So that being a part of my thing that I'm talking about in terms of she was afraid that she was going to get deported because she's undocumented. And the same thing with the young lady, not with Tiana, but the thing is, with her having 13 misdemeanors, she was looking at a really long prison sentence. And also, my other two subjects, my third subject is a young man out of Indianapolis named D'Angelo Sandage, who got arrested at a protest for George Floyd on June 1st, 2020. And he's never protested before until now because the sight of George Floyd dying made him sick to his stomach. On the night he got arrested, he had some beer spray and a taser for protection. And it's not against the law in Indianapolis because it's an open carry state to have either one. And he faced a $5,000 fine and a year in jail if he was convicted on both charges, especially if they were felonies. So what happens is that a lot of times the protesters are charged with felonies when they're actually misdemeanors. And misdemeanors are first time misdemeanor. It's a non-violent offense. And the same thing with my fourth subject, Lee Percy Christian III out of Phoenix, who had to relinquish his First Amendment rights to protest to avoid a lengthy jail sentence because he got arrested at a Black Lives Matter protest for George Floyd in Phoenix on October 3rd. And he was also protesting the killings of black men at the time next to George Floyd as well. And the prosecutors asked for a $100,000 bond, of which they knew he could not afford. So they made a deal where he had to give up his rights to protest in order to avoid felony charges, of which the police said he resisted arrest and harmed officers while getting arrested. And then the bond was lowered to $1,000. And then that way he could not protest anymore. His whole basic rights under the Constitution were taken away from him because of his data, basically, and also how they basically turned misdemeanor charges into felony charges, which carry jail time. So all four of my participants are kind of in the same boat in terms of they all kind of were first-time offenders, but also their charges that were brought against them took away their rights to protest and also took away their rights. For instance, with D'Angelo, he had to cancel a job interview because he was so shook up by the incident. And also, too, at that time with COVID running rampant, he was afraid of catching COVID. So for instance, the job had told him, like, we'll do the interview remotely. But he was still just really upset behind it because you have to understand that he spent a night in jail, something he's never done before. And that's how it is basically for a lot of the defendants. So my proposed solutions have to do with what needs to happen is that there needs to be a sentencing reform, and misdemeanors need to be treated as what they are. First-time non-violent offenses that should not warrant jail time. And the defendant needs to have, under the Constitution, legal rights over their data and how it's collected and how it is used. Personal data can only be used in a court of law for extreme circumstances, and the right to protest should not be taken away, as with Lee Percy Christian III, in which he now has no rights to protest because of the avoidance of jail time. So my solutions have more to do with the fact that police need to be more transparent. ICE and the local police departments are targeting protesters, especially the undocumented, and they use their data to track them through facial recognition, social media apps, tracking software, and other means of finding data on protesters and using their data against them. And protesters should be told about their right to an attorney and the right to remain quiet, as in the Miranda laws. So those are the things that are happening right now in terms of what police departments are doing to collect data and how they're also using it to affect people's lives when it comes to applying for a credit, when it comes to military service, when it comes to applying for civil service jobs, and so on. And the thing is, background checks are still going to be used, Corey checks basically, because no matter what happens, even if your charges get dropped and you settle for, no jail time, they still can check your background checks because it's still there. And it's just like when you're trying to apply for a HB1 visa. If you go to a protest, you have to let them know if you got arrested. So again, my recommendations are there needs to be more training and sensitivity towards protesters' personal data. Because of what happened with George Floyd and the national reckoning on police brutality, people lose more confidence in the police if all they know is brutality and person's data. Personal data is crucial to that person's livelihood, their family safety and well-being. And for first-time protesters, especially in the South and the Midwest, their data should be held in a database that only a grand jury can see if the defendant demands a special grand jury. So all my subject matters are kind of like, again, like I said earlier, like in the same boat in some ways because they don't want to go to jail and also they don't want their rights to be taken away. But at the same time, again, like I say at the bottom of my recommendations, all my subject matters are Black and Latino, and they are unfairly being targeted by law enforcement because of what happened to George Floyd. And they are young people, and their arrest will affect their lives, such as Lee Percy Christian, who had to give up his First Amendment rights to protest. And there also needs to be more accountability on the part of district attorneys who have a political agenda, such as setting bond at $100,000, knowing the defendant could not afford it, and they have personal data that can and will be used against them in a court of law. Again, this is my project, and those are my recommendations, and this is my case study, excuse me. But those are basically my recommendations for my, I chose only to do 4 subjects because I had a whole bunch more in my actual case study, actually not not case study, but my actual project. So that for me is really important because my project really deals with the fact that a person would be able to contact this group, My Data, My Rights, and be able to set up something where they would be working pro bono. Okay, that would be kind of like what I would be setting my project up as, where the people would be able to be told what are their rights, what their personal data can do, and how they can control their data. That's basically the point of my project: is how do you control your data when you are fighting social injustice, such as this. And again, there are so many ways that they can be tracked, and that's the difference right now, especially because people are afraid. Their phones can be used for anything, and so on. So again, this is my project, and these are also my covers for my project as well, that are in my My Data, My Rights. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.